Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time here live or watching, hello. I'm so glad that you made it. Make sure you click to subscribe on my channel, LB The Lover of Books. Y'all, I'm 10 away from 975. I'm getting close to that 1,000 marker that I've been trying to get to. But even more exciting, I have 49 recorded author chats up and 10,800 hours watched. So you're going to find an author chat that you have not seen, that you probably already read the book, and it's great to go back and get inside their brains because these authors are amazing. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. But now I want to introduce this amazing author. So Safiya Sinclair was born and raised in Montego Bay, which I now say Mo Bay all the time because I love that phrase, in Jamaica. She's the author of the memoir, How to Say Babylon, which we're going to discuss today, which is the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award and autobiography, a finalist, the Kirkus Prize, and long-listed, actually short-listed, because it needs to be updated, the Women's Prize in Nonfiction and the OCM Bocas Prize for Literature in the Caribbean. How to Say Babylon was named one of the 100 notable books of the year by the New York Times, top 10 books of 2023 for the Washington Post, The Atlantic, Time Magazine. She's a Read with Jenna pick. And also, I love this one, Barack Obama's favorite books of 2023. So that's a prize list to be on. It was also named Best Book by The New Yorker, NPR, Guardian, Los Angeles Times, Vulture, Harper's Bazaar, Barnes & Noble. And I don't know why more people aren't reading this book. It's so fabulous. I hope more people pick it up and watch this interview. But I just want to say thank you so much, Safiya, for coming. And we're going to talk about How to Say Babylon today, which is a stunning story of her struggle to break free of her rigid Rastafarian upbringing, ruled by her father's strict patriarchal views and repressive control of her childhood, to find her own voice as a woman and as a poet. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, are you muted? There you go. Try to unmute, Safiya.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
Wouldn't allow me to unmute myself, but hi, I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be with you all. And thank you for that lovely intro. Looking forward to, our conversation.
Exactly. Well, okay, I just jump right into it. Just so you know, everybody on this call has read the book. So spoilers are fair game. We're not going to try to
Okay.
hide or, hint at things. Like, this one is all out. So I'm going to jump towards more the end of the book to start it out. And the reason is because when you were preparing your speech in Kingston, you
Yeah.
said you always know how to finish, but you have difficulty starting. And so I
Mhm.
want to know if it's the same for this memoir. Was it as hard to start this as your other things? And if so, how did you manage that?
It was absolutely the same. So when I wrote that line in the book, I was like, this is so true. It's still true even now. I knew where the book was going to end, um, because I lived it most
Right.
recently.
It is the ending.
It had happened the year I began to write the book. And so since we can talk freely without saying spoilers, the book ends with me having this moment with my father and reading my poem to him, and having this moment where, I felt that he saw me for the first time and he said, I'm listening and I hear you. And when that happened, I just felt this release, this sigh of so much that I let go in that moment. And I felt then that I could finally start writing the book because I knew this is how it would end.
Yeah.
So I went in like knowing that's the end, but I was like, where to begin?
Yeah.
Where does one begin telling the story of your life, right? Not just, well, I was born in
Right.
September, you know. And it took a couple tries. Like I had a few different beginnings. Um, the first beginning of the book was maybe chapter 4, now
Okay.
chapter 4. Um, and then before that, I had a beginning where I talked about my grandmother, my mother's mother. And, sadly, then I cut those chapters, and it was really hard getting there because I felt that to tell the story of my upbringing, to tell the story of growing up under Rastafari, that I needed to tell some of the history of Rastafari and how it intersects with Jamaican history as well. So I thought, okay, this chapter where Haile Selassie comes to Jamaica and, all of the Rastas swarm the airport and they're meeting the person they consider to be their Messiah. I was like, okay, the book might begin here because one, it's so epic. How can I not tell this story? Um, but it's deeply connected to how my father came into Rastafari, and then that affects how I was, affected by Rastafari. So I thought, okay, let's begin there. And then I added the prologue because I was like, well, it needs to begin, if even just for 2 pages, with me and a kind of precursor to the story. But I discovered that a lot of people don't read prologues. They just get
I
to.
love a prologue. Like, keep them coming.
I discovered that there was this big discourse online, I think maybe last fall, where people were like, yep, I just skip the prologue. I don't read the prologue. I just go to chapter 1. I was like, wow, all that work and people skipping the prologue.
Don't stop for them, just to
I
say, like, keep
know.
it for those of us reading. Well, and that was a little bit alarm, not dis, I don't know how to, like, not even alarming, but we know from the topic of this book that you're trying to escape Rastafari, but then it's almost a little bit reverent at the beginning, and you're talking about how they're oppressed. And so it seems to be already set up with a not quite sure how you feel about it, because they are an oppressed people in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
So it was such an interesting spot to start.
Yeah. And, part of what I wanted to do in writing of the book is to show the nuances of Rastafari, right? So it's a lot of it, and how I grew up was very particular to me and my household. Um, and is not a blanket statement on all of Rastafari, but I also think that the history is so important, because so many people don't know that Rastafari are a persecuted minority in Jamaica, you know? Um, Many people don't know that Rastafari are outcasts on the island, or, aren't allowed to have jobs, or aren't allowed, and so the context was really important to also understanding my father. And there was a lot about Rastafari history that I myself did not know before I sat down to write the book, because there are no history books on Rastafari. There is no, like, holy text of Rastafari. A lot of it is oral wisdom that's passed on from brethren to brethren. And so it hadn't been passed on to me. And it was when I sat down to write the book that I then asked, well, now I would like to know.
So how did you do that, though? Because you're a female
Yeah,
asking for knowledge. Is that something that's sacred, that they only pass brethren to brethren? Like, how did you go about the research to find this stuff out?
I just asked. I asked my father and I asked my brother. And then I did a lot of research on my own. So, for the example, for the chapter we were just talking about, the first chapter with Haile Selassie, I did a lot of research. I read old newspaper articles. I looked at archival footage and tried to recreate the scene exactly as it happened. Um, but yeah, most of it, I just invited myself into the circle and said, look, I need to know. And they were quite, my brother and my father were, I think, happy to see I had interest in Rastafari history. So they were happy to kind of share with me.
Well, I loved that initial chapter because, and first of all, I'm going to go and say to the chat box, thank you. Everybody here is reading prologue. So this is a group of prologue readers.
Good.
We'll just get that out of the way. But I did love that first chapter. It felt like a movie scene, with the plane landing and the people swelling, and it just I thought it was a great big entrance for the book. So I appreciated that to start it out. What you do address, though, is you have an author's note, which I would love if you could read that. If y'all haven't listened to her audiobook, I'm just going to say it probably is worth it to go back and read this book again and listen to the audiobook because she has such great nuance in her voice, her tone, emotion, like it really captures. So, but if you
Thank you.
haven't, this is your teaser. So is
Okay.
that okay?
Yeah, this
Okay.
is the teaser, and I've never read this before, so except when I recorded the audiobook. Um, they asked me to write an author's note, which I think is something that they ask all memoirists to write at the beginning of the book. And true to form, I was like, well, can it be a poem? Like why write a, boring author? I want everything to be beautiful. So this is my author's note. Memory is a river. Memory is a pebble at the bottom of the river, slippery with the moss of our living hours. Memory is a tributary, a brackish stream returning to the ocean that dreamt it. Memory is the sea. Memory is the house on the sand with a red door I have stepped through, trying to remember the history of the waves. In telling this story, I have followed my river all the way down to the sea, treading as closely as I could to my memory of the people, places, and events that shaped my life. Outside of my family, most of the names and identifying characteristics of the people who appear in this book have been changed. May each of you find your way back to the water.
Ah, thank you. Like I've been waiting. Like it's so good. It's so good. I
Thank
can't believe you haven't
you.
read that live before. I think
No.
it's absolutely beautiful. And the sea, really Jamaica is a character, but the sea especially, I feel like is its own character because
Yes.
you reference it quite a bit. And
Yeah.
also your distance, you constantly know how
No.
close you are or far away, and you make that announcement throughout. It's almost
Yeah.
like when you're further away from it, your life isn't going as well. And the closer you get to it, the more you find yourself.
Yeah.
Was that your intention?
That was my intention, but that's also how it felt to me growing up. Because I was born literally at the seaside in Mobay. And so I always felt this deep affinity for the sea, and so did my mother. And we had so many moments of those early moments in my childhood with me and my mother. She would take me down to the sea and she would tell me the story of our lives over and over. And it stuck with me. And I think that's partially why I think of storytelling as its own kind of ocean with crests and waves. And this is kind of how I thought about the book when I was writing it, right? That in some sense, it does mirror this kind of movement of the ocean, which is so dear to me.
But you didn't know how to swim yet at age
No,
4.
did not
So
know.
how can, yeah, I'm thinking, how can she live there? But that's a very important
Yeah,
part of the book as well, because at one part, your mother has to save you, giving you breath, and then you directly compare it to your father who is suffocating you, which was so poetic in itself. But talk about that a little bit because that was an important part for me.
being saved.
Yes, like that
Yeah,
moment of,
yeah,
like realizing how dangerous
yeah.
it is, but how much you still loved it. Like it didn't change your
No,
love.
no, it didn't. It didn't at all. And I think, it's an interesting thing. I don't know why I didn't yet know how to swim, but a lot of people in Jamaica, you'd be surprised to know in Jamaica don't know how to swim, even with the proximity to the sea. But I think it was more, I just felt at that young age, I felt called
Mhm.
um, by something out in the water, which is actually a part of the book that I cut out. I once had in, the sort of long passage about what had been calling me from the water that I just felt I needed to walk in. But um, what I loved about keeping that part of the story in was that my mother um was the one who saved me. And in writing the book, I began to see all the different ways that she had saved me. That was just the first time. That was not the last time,
Mm.
and it wasn't always apparent to me all the ways that she had saved me until I sat down to write the book. So the writing itself became this really eye-opening um, portrait of my mother and her strength.
Well, you mentioned that the sea really had healing powers for you. And it sounds like your writing this memoir also had some healing power as well. Not only did, like you when you went to see your father, but like just
Yeah.
seeing your mother through a different lens, right? Because you see your mom different as an adult as when you did when you're 16. You know what? It's just,
Absolutely. Yeah. It's an interesting thing to look back on your parents um, in your 30s versus at 16, And so there were so many things that were revelatory to me in writing the book that I'm so grateful for. Um, I see someone say, I believe the sea has healing powers. Like my mother, actually, her and her sisters actually believe this. So if we had like a broken bone, my mother would say, you need to go and bathe in the sea, and the sea will help you heal. Like, she
yeah.
really believed it. And in some ways I do too. Every time I go home, I feel like I'm cured, I'm restored, I'm brought back to myself in a particularly um, healing way. Um,
And yet you live so far from the ocean right now.
oh, don't remind me. I am so homesick all the time. For those of you who don't know, I'm currently in the desert. I'm in Phoenix. I'm a professor at ASU. And so I do find myself even dreaming of the sea. I have dreams about being in the sea. Um, yeah, because it is such a big part of my life. But I go back home often to see my niece, who I talk about in the book.
Mhm.
Uh, and I spend like all day at the beach in the water.
So you talk about it being your home, right? Like the first
Yeah.
place that you loved and you haven't found anything you've loved more. Do you still picture like the White House, or is that sort of that central location for you, or has it shifted somewhere?
No, every time I think of home, that's where I think of. And even from the author's note,
Mhm.
when I think about memory, when I say memory is the house on the sand with a red door I've stepped through, trying to remember the history of the waves, that's White House.
That's White House. Okay.
That's White House. And so every time I think about home, that's what I think of. I think of that house on the sand, right in front of the waves. And that's also uniquely tied to my deepest core memories.
Do you still have that property in your family?
Yes, yes, we do.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Because you talk about the developments coming up and not selling, like holding out for that. That's amazing.
Yes, and like I said, it's literally my great grandfather left the will in such a mess that I think not even hoteliers can figure it out. They've tried. They have tried to come, but they can't know. They'll
Yeah.
never have it because we cannot. There is no way to tell what section of this beach belongs to who and versus this house belongs to who. It really is. He so willfully, I think, um was careful with how he wrote the will, that even now if you go to White House, and some people have told me, people I don't know read the book and they visited Jamaica and they're like, I went to White House. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But you can still go there. It's still there. And, there's big hotel on this side, a big hotel on that side, and White House is still there, just as it was when I was born there.
So on one hand, you and your mother are so drawn to the sea, there's this water element. But on the other side, you often refer to your father as fire. And he would
Yeah.
even say that to your brother. And that seems so, opposite. How did that work? I mean, was that an intentional metaphor between the two of them and made it complementary, or also one puts out the other?
I hadn't thought of that one puts out the other. Yes, it was an intentional metaphor, but it also felt very true to my parents and their defining characteristics. And as you say, fire is plays a big part in Rastafari culture, in Rastafari language. Um, the things that they don't like, they invoke fire on. They say fire burn, fire burn Babylon, meaning we want to destroy this thing. But they also like call my father calls my brother fire
Oh,
as an honorific. So it's also seen as like the source of power.
mhm.
'Cause you would not call a woman fire. So, it's an interesting thing. But my mother always had this very gentle, nurturing, um, yeah, very, you know, oceanic kind of personality. And the more I thought about it too, it was, um, on the outside, she seemed like this very silent and quiet person. On the inside, expansive, boundless, motions and movements of the sea happening. And in the writing, I discovered that this was her own kind of power, her own kind of strength that I didn't necessarily recognize when I was a young person. I wanted her to manifest strength and power in this other way, in this fiery way, which was the way I was taught was powerful, from my father. And in the writing of the book, I realized no, there's actually many different ways to be strong. And my mother had always been strong.
Yeah. Well, fire is just such a loud power, like it's so showy and so in your
Yeah.
face.
Yeah.
And hers was just that quiet, deep. Yeah. And it's not that the ocean's any less powerful than fire. It's just a different type. I loved
Different.
it.
Yeah.
Um, you also talk about how your mother shaped you as a learner, which was, I think, really what another way that saved you, right? Because she gave you that power of learning and education. And she also put the first book of poetry in your hands, if I'm not mistaken, from your memoir.
She did. She
How
absolutely.
much did that poem, the poems of a child's world, how much did
Yes.
that influence you?
It influenced me a great deal, and for those of you who read the book, you know that she she handed this book of poems to me at one of the most pivotal moments in my life as a young person, 10 years old. I just been wearing dreadlocks for like 2 years, and had been teased at school. And I had this girl I thought was my friend, and then turns out she wasn't really my friend. And she said, I don't want to be a friend. I don't want to be friends with a Rasta. And I felt so deeply wounded and deeply hurt. And it was the first time I felt ashamed to be myself, and I withdrew. And I also tried to harm myself.
Right.
And I told everybody it was an accident. And my mother was the one who knew wasn't an accident. And that's when she sat me down, or she took this book of poems and she told me how much poetry meant to her. Um, and she said, I think it will help you as well. Like, she knew I needed that help, but what she gave me it was a gift. It was gold. Because when I read that poem, the first poem, The Tiger by William Blake, and like it came alive in my mind in this way that I was so struck by it. It was so wondrous. I was like, I need to examine this. I need to feel this sense of wonder, and be like chasing this sense of wonder really made all the hurt I had felt from this friend leave me. It had been overtaken by something else, something so beautiful. And that's when I wrote my first poem. And that feeling of wonder, that feeling of this other world that, you know, through language, um, it made everything seem so expansive and so very possible. And that's what my mother gave to me.
What a
You
gift. Like, I would say thank you to your mom on behalf of all of us readers,
know?
because who knows where the path would have led, right? Like, this may have been, like you said, it was such a pivotal moment. And so, I just thank her for giving you that, because now you give us the gift of this book, which is beautiful. Um, do you still, now that you have written a memoir, you still say you still are a poet and a writer? Is that how you refer to yourself, or will you always be poet first? And
Poet first, always, always. How can I not be, you know,
right.
um with how much poetry has given me and how crucial it has been to my survival and my being here talking to you is really because of poetry. Um, and so, yes, I'll always say poet first. Then
Well, RL, I'm not sure the name, but RL says, what are you working on now? Is it more poetry, another book? Anything
yeah,
you can tell us about that?
I am I am working on more poetry. I'm working on poetry that is really focusing on the way that the Rastafari speak. And so if you read the book, you know my father speaks in this very particular way of upending the English language, of turning things on their heads. You know, he doesn't say understand, he says overstand. He doesn't say appreciate, he says appreciate love. He doesn't say me, he says I and I. Um, and I was very fascinated with the root of the Rasta language, which I'm calling Rasta poetics. And a lot of it is also a male dominated vernacular. And I thought, well, okay, how can I bloom a femininity out of this, you know, out of the linguistics of Rastafari? And so I'm working on that. And then I'm also writing a novel, which, you know, I've already sold this novel. It's under contract. And it's a novel about the last 600 years. It's about 600 years of Jamaican history, told from the perspective of 6 different women and 6 different time periods of Jamaican history. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that as well. I'm looking forward to inventing things.
Right. Well, because before you're stuck to history, like you're stuck to your life, and that's how it ends. And this is what
Yeah,
happens. But now with
you know,
fiction, you have a little bit of leeway
some
to
leeway.
decide where it goes. What's
Yeah.
the timeline for that book?
Oh, girl.
Maybe I shouldn't ask.
Don't ask. You can't give me anxiety. But you know,
No, we're just
I'm
looking
hoping
for.
that I really want to spend some time with my poetry for the next few months. Because I spent so much time with the prose. Um, but you know, I'm hoping within the next 2 years we will see this novel.
Well, it just came to me. I mean, you come from a musical family, you write poetry, and so many of lyrics really is poetry. Have you ever thought with working with a musician to put your poetry, you know, into sound, into some sort of music form?
In fact, I do. I write
Okay, tell me about it.
I write libretti,
Okay.
which is so I write the lyrics for choral odes and operas. And so I'm working on one right now, actually, that's due in like a week. But I have a composer that I collaborate with. She read my poems years ago and reached out to me and was like, I would love to collaborate with you. And I began writing lyrics for these short choral odes that were sung by choruses, that were performed by symphonies and choirs, and now we're working on a long form. It's like almost an opera length that's based completely on my idea. And so I'm writing the libretto for that. And so that's something else that I do that's very much tied to the musicality of language. And I'm so glad I get to do it.
I don't know how you have time to dream of the ocean
Oh,
when
no.
you're writing poetry, operas, memoirs, now fiction and teaching. Like, you are amazing. That's a lot to do.
It's a lot. I
But
agree.
don't stress. Take it as it comes and remember the
Yes.
ocean. Like,
Exactly, exactly. That's kind of what I do. And I always have like a trip planned at the end of a long project where I'm just like, soon I will be in the ocean.
well, I just, I had not read your poetry prior to this memoir. And so I will say I'm going to dive deep more into it. But I knew when I was reading, I think it was in chapter 11, when you said, I resigned myself to sorrow's permanence. I was just like, oh, like it was just tearing me up because it's just everything you write. It's with such intent. And you can tell that you spend time really thinking about what word works best and what phrasing. And I think it's such a neat combination, your poetry into your written work of a book. I can't wait to see what you do with fiction. I think it's going to be fabulous.
Mm.
Um, all right. I also want to talk about your mother's adorable phrase, G's and P's. Like, I kind of want to start using that phrase in my life. I think it's adorable. What
Oh
other
my
phrase?
gosh.
What are some other like?
That's not hers. That's just a patois term.
I know, but that's not like I
Everybody
never
in
used
Jamaica
that.
says that.
Oh,
So
really?
yeah, it's like an exclamation of it's like when you say, oh shoot, or like, oh my goodness. In Jamaica, we say, G's and peace.
I'm totally gonna use that phrase because I think it's the best.
Yeah.
Um, there was a question. I'm gonna go ahead and move into this because I thought it was a great when you were talking about getting the Rastafari language into more of a feminism movement. Aaron Rose asked, how do you see the feminism evolving or not evolving in Jamaica?
Hmm. I think that we've taken strides in Jamaica. I think not quickly enough, but we are taking certain strides. We actually had a female prime minister. We were like one of the few nations, in the world that had a female head of state. So, that is big progress. If we're talking about inside Rastafari in particular versus Jamaica, I think it's probably a little bit slower to evolve. And I think part of the reason that is because a lot of women simply just leave the movement. Um, Most of the women and girls that I knew when I was growing up who were inside of the Rastafari movement cut their dreadlocks and left. I don't know anybody who's still inside of it. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting thing. Every time I go home, I try to suss it out, but none of my sisters are there in Jamaica anymore. My mother's not there. So my only connection to Jamaica when I go home is my father and my brother, and they of course are still connected to Rastafari. So I'm only really getting their viewpoints.
Is your brother's wife also Rastafari?
Oh, she's not.
She's not. Okay.
Yeah, which is something, my brother himself is a very progressive Rastafari brethren, and so I'm really so happy about that because when I heard my niece was gonna be born, that was one of the things I asked him first. I said, is she gonna grow up the way that we grew up? Is she gonna grow up the way me and my sisters grew up? And he said, no. She will choose for herself like what she wants to do, what she wants to be, what she wants to believe. It will all be her choice. And I was so happy because I was like, that's one cycle broken.
It was a choice you didn't have.
Choice I did not have. Yes.
Well, what choice? I mean, thinking about your niece, have you, how old is she now?
She's 10.
She's 10. So have you had conversations about that with her, or is she pretty much sheltered from, I guess I'm looking like what have your family members said? Have they read this? What did they think?
I think they've read it, but they haven't said anything to me. I just had this conversation with my mom last week because I was like, Mom, like no one has said anything to me about the book. And she's like, oh, well, we didn't know if were allowed to say anything to you about the book. I was like, what do you mean? Of course. I think they don't always understand the sort of world of an author. So they're like, are we allowed to like tell her what we think? I was like, yes, please. Um, but I think my niece will come to it later in life. It's my hope that she does when she's old enough. I dedicated the book to her, and part of why I wrote the book is because I heard she was going to be born, and I was very concerned about what the next generation of Sinclair girls, what their life would look like. And I wanted it to look different. And it was my hope in writing the book that the book itself would be this bridge to a different future. Yay.
Thank you. All right. So people are going to have time to ask you questions. So be getting those together. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions while we wait. All right. Are you ready?
Okay.
Princess or dragon?
Oh, dragon.
Plath or Dickinson?
Oh, Plath.
Edgar Allan Poe or Bob Dylan?
Poe.
This one's easy. Sea or mountain?
See, all day.
All right. This question is knowing that you have a choice now.
Yes.
Skirt or pants?
Ooh, skirt. I wore lots of dresses.
I
Which
did.
is like
I love your fashion
it's
sense.
this weird like thing where it's like I just wanted the choice, but I actually like dresses. I like to be feminine.
Do you like writing in margins or a notebook?
Margins. I mean, I
Veg,
also compose on a notebook, but yeah, I make notes in
um,
margins.
vegetarian or non-vegetarian?
Non-vegetarian.
I know that you searched the dictionary high and low for a lot of years. Do you have a favorite word?
Yes.
What is it?
Incandescent.
That's a good one. Chisel or sculpt?
Sculpt.
And what is, just share with us your favorite Jamaican food and or drink.
My favorite Jamaican food is our national dish. It's this dish called ackee and saltfish. And every time my mother sees me or I'm coming to visit, she knows she has to have some ackee ready to prepare for me because it's the one thing I just can't live without. Favorite drink, we also have a drink called sorrel, which some people also call like Jamaica in other parts of the world. It's called Jamaica because it is from Jamaica. And we drink it a lot at Christmas time, and it's this Jamaica flour that's distilled into this kind of juice, but we put ginger in it, and as Jamaicans do, rum.
Erin Rose has a question. I'll go ahead and ask for someone visiting Jamaica, where would you recommend that they visit? And what would you ask that they not do? And how best should they interact with locals?
Hmm. I'm really biased, so I think you should visit Montego Bay because that's the place that made me. I think the best beach in Jamaica is in Montego Bay. It's a beach called Doctor's Cave. Um, I would say don't have your wedding on a plantation in Jamaica. You'd be surprised how many people come up to me and the first thing they want to say to me when they know I'm from Jamaica is, "Oh my God, I was there for a wedding on a plantation." I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
No, no, don't do that. And also don't tell me that. Like what reaction do you want?
Mhm.
Um, I think it's good to interact with the locals in Jamaica, and particularly Montego Bay. You can go meet the fishermen who are like catching the fish, which is again like where I'm from. You go to White House and still meet the fishermen. Probably one of them is my uncle. Because there's so many hotels that you go to, and as I described in my book, Jamaicans are actually not, the average Jamaican is not allowed to go there. There's large parts of the island that we're like forbidden from from entering because it's only for tourists. So I think, with the help of a tour guide, or, with the hotel, it's good to get a sense of the island outside of the resort.
Wonderful. All right, we have Carol who's going to ask a question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. Go ahead, Carol.
Hey. Hi, Safiya.
Hi, Carol. How are you?
I'm great. So nice to meet you. Can't say how much I loved your book. I wanted to say your relationship with Lidge and Ife and Sherry just really moved me deeply, as the youngest of six, and some similarities in our upbringing. It moved me. It really moved me. I wondered what you think, besides the poetry book that your mom got you, what attributed to all of your academic success? Like, it isn't just you, it's all four of you academically are so successful. And sometimes when we're in survival mode, it's difficult to concentrate and be academic. And I'm just amazed at that. And I wondered what you thought contributed to that.
Well, thank you for the question, and also thank you for getting all our names right. Kudos. You know, it's an interesting question because I don't know if I have the answer beyond saying, like, my mom really helped us by giving us the tools that we needed, like maybe we already had the sort of natural kind of intellectual lean towards education and whatever we kind of put our minds to. But I think my mother, the way that she created an after school educational program for me and my siblings, I don't know how many people grew up with that kind of um, really specific individualized learning tailored to them. Um, and we were just so lucky. It was so normal to us. It was when I got older, I realized just how lucky we were to have someone who um, gave us all the books we needed, had us write songs, had us paint, had us kind of expand the universe of our minds, and never told us anything was impossible. And so even though we grew up in this very specific way that could have felt very lonely and very small, it was my mother who made the world feel so large. And that was through books and through language and literature and education. And so, I mean, I really have to credit her. All the people in Montego Bay would ask my mother all the time the same question you're asking us, like, what's the secret? Like, why are they so bright? And she would say, well, here's the kind of program I have for them that they love. And she shared it with the other parents and children in Montego Bay.
I love that. Well done, Mom. Well done.
Yeah, she also doesn't like to take the credit because she comes with me to some of my events and people are always like, wow, thank you. And she's like, it's not me, no, it's not me. It was all them.
Love that. I love that. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
that
you.
question, Carol. Speaking of your mom, when you told her it's okay to give feedback, did she on the book?
She did. But I asked her, Mom, how much have you read? And she was like, well, I read the front part and I read the back part, meaning the acknowledgments. And I was like, that's it. And she's like, yeah, I have to take it slowly because for her, and I've extended so much grace, of course, to my family, like how strange it must be to have someone kind of retell these moments. It's moments of my life, but it's also their lives too. And so she's like, I have to take it slowly because some of these moments, like you've told it so well, like how I remember it, it's like going right back there. Um, and I said, well, that's okay. That's okay. And then she, the same way I describe in the book that she tells me the story of my life, she does it every time I see her. So she'll be like, do you remember that time when you walked into the sea and I had to come save you? And I'm like, yes, Mom, it's in the book. And then she's like, do you remember that time when you saw the nail? And I say, yes, Mom, it's in the book. And then she goes, see, I don't have to read the book. I already lived it. I know it.
It's just,
I said, fair enough.
yeah. When she's ready, she'll be ready. All right, Erin Rose, I'm going to go ahead and get you to unmute. Go ahead and ask your question.
My phone is acting up, so I'm sorry that I'm trying to get my video to
No
show
worries.
me, but
No worries.
thank you so much for your time, and this has been wonderful. One of the things I always like to read reviews and just different perspectives on books I read, and so I read different ones, and they said a couple of them that your book had echoes of the book Educated and Born a Crime, and I was wondering, one, if you've read those two, and two, if you agree with that kind of comparison.
I don't even know if I'm the right person to ask. Like, do you agree? Or do you agree? I will say that when I was thinking about writing the memoir and I kind of looked into the genre, there were lots of memoirs that I wasn't I wasn't as like caught by. Like I thought, okay, this is an interesting story, but it's not told in the most interesting way. But Educated was one of the memoirs I read where I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. But then also I was like, this is my life. It's like, wait, hold on. Like, this is so eerie. Um, and last summer, Tara Westover and I met each other and we kind of like hit it off because we were talking and we found all of these similarities in our upbringing. And when she read my book, she sent me a note that was like, I felt similarly that when I was reading the book, so much of it felt so true to my own life. And then she put, I'm so sorry in the brackets. And so when I replied to her, I was like, thank you so much. And it's interesting that so much of my life was similar to yours. I am so sorry. It's mutual. And so yeah, I think that there are a lot of similarities between how we grew up and this sort of the patriarch, the patriarchal father who kind of pulls the family into isolation, who has his own kind of interpretation, fundamentalist interpretation of a particular set of tenets and beliefs, and trying to figure out for ourselves who we want to be in the world. I think are some similarities between our books and our stories.
There you are, Erin
Thank
Rose.
you.
Any other questions from the audience? Anybody have anything they want to ask Safiya? If not, I have plenty more. What was the reaction that you received in Jamaica to this? Or is it kind of the same as your family? Like, has it been just quiet and the reactions you're getting are all around the world elsewhere?
No, I've had a lot of Jamaicans write me really, really lovely notes. A lot of Jamaican women who say, this, they say two things. They say, this reminds me so much of my life, or this brought me right back home. Or they'll say, wow, I had no idea. So, there are even Jamaicans in Jamaica who did not know exactly what it meant to grow up inside of Rastafari, because it is such a secluded kind of, and such a small section of the Jamaican population. So, yeah, I've received such warm messages and support from Jamaica and in the Caribbean that makes me feel very good.
That's awesome. I would like to ask you, and this is a little bit deeper, but you even asked this of yourself, why do I write? And I wanted to know if it's still the same reason, or has that evolved or changed in some way, because now you've put your life into a story, which is different than poetry, even though you used poetry as a tool to tell your life. So is it still the same now?
It's still the same. It's still the same. And it's also the same reason, you asked me, is it always going to be poet first? Yes, it is. Um, it does feel to me still that writing is a necessity, the same way it came to me as not just a vessel for meaning or trying to distill my experiences from day to day through language. Um, but it also feels very crucial to my survival that there is no version of my life without writing, without language, without telling stories through this different windows of emotion and different currents of feeling. And so what else is there, you know Keats said truth and beauty,
Yeah.
right, as the meaning of life. And for me, language is the way I approach my understanding of truth through beauty.
Well, I also want to know, you were talking about dreaming. What dialect do you dream in? Because that was a question when you said they dream and, they understand each other's dialects, their dream. How does that fit with you? What is your dialect?
Ooh, that's such an interesting question. Um, sometimes I dream, and it is me having conversations with my family in patois and like Jamaican dialect, but it's always only with my family. Um, a lot of the time, it's not even language. It's kind of, again, just through images
Mhm.
as this sort of vessel for memory. Um, yeah, that's a good question. Now I'm gonna think about it as I go to sleep tonight. And I
Good
wake up, I'm gonna
morning.
write it down. What language
Well, I
were
loved
they
when you
speaking to me?
I loved, dreams came up quite a bit in the story, and especially, I say story, I should say your life.
Yeah,
But
I'm used to it.
part
People call it a novel all the time.
you're like, no, this is real. I lived this. But you did say that you hardened around your dreams like a pearl. Can you
Yeah.
explain that concept to us? Because I loved that analogy.
Yeah, in that sense, I meant dreams as in hopes for the future, hopes and aspirations for the future. Um, and this I really love that metaphor of like this, the grit of sand, the sort of thing that's painful to the oyster becoming the thing that allows it to, by trying to soothe the pain of the grit of sand, they create the pearl, right? And so it's beauty that's rendered through pain.
Mhm.
And so I really loved that metaphor, and it seemed so apt to my
Yeah.
own.
But for the pain, you'd never have the pearl. So yeah,
Exactly.
I loved that as well. I do love that you also brought up and brought awareness to violence against women and colored women. I think that was also an extremely important part. So thank you so much for telling us your story. I just want to say, just I also want to thank you. I just want to thank you for everything, but just your sheer audacity for sharing your light, your dragon, for leaving us with your permanent mark, spine and all, because it was a beautiful thing and it will continue to be a beautiful thing. I cannot say enough. Like I'm just going to gush and gush, and I normally don't do this, but it's one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. And I cannot wait to see what more you produce for the world, for me, because I thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyed this. And sometimes it was very hard to read. But
I'm
again,
sorry.
you have to no, don't ever apologize for that.
It was
Sometimes,
hard to write. It was hard to live.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
just the things that, like, but for the pain, we can't get to the pearl. So
Exactly.
again, I just want to say thank you so much for that. If y'all want to connect with Safiya, she's on Twitter, she's on Instagram for her latest news. Her fashion style is on point. I will say I love it for that as much as, but no, she's fantastic. Just so you know, in 3 weeks, I'm going to be chatting with historical fiction guru Alison Pataki for her latest Finding Margaret Fuller, and where she discussed an epic imagining of the life of Margaret Fuller, the Americans' forgotten leading lady and central figure in the movement that defined a nation. So if you don't know who Margaret Fuller is, you might want to find that book so you can read it. And then we'll have more authors coming throughout the summer. But again, check out my YouTube. You can find out more authors there that maybe you haven't read and try. This was our first nonfiction, by the way, Safiya.
Goodness. Wow.
Yes. So and
honored.
also you are number 50. So I just wanted to give you like major props. I didn't plan it that way, but this is one of the most memorable books that I've read and conversations that I've had. So thank you so much for meeting with us. I hope to be able to talk to you again at some point. And if there's anything we can do as a group to help promote your stuff, please let us know, and just appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Laura Beth. I do so many of these, but you asked me questions today I've never been asked, and I always so appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And everybody, I'll see y'all in 3 weeks, and we'll just keep an eye out. No pressure, Safiya. Just when you get your stuff out, we'll be ready to read it. So don't put the pressure on yourself.
Okay, don't be there anyway, but thank you. And thank you to everyone who came to join us this Sunday evening. Have a good rest of the night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Have a
Bye.
good one.
Bye.